Welcome back to a new episode of Let the Journey Begin. I am your host, filling in for Jason Waller. My name is Alex Meschi, and replacing Hillary Roberts today, we have Jaana Woodbury. Welcome, Jaana. This will be our first show together. It's fun and exciting. We got some fun updates from this past weekend, and I'm excited to do this with you since this is our first one, and we're kind of conquering this from East Coast, West Coast.
I know. I'm excited too.
Yeah, so this past weekend you weren't able to join us, but we had a good bulk of the RSF team, pretty much everybody but you. Don't feel left out. But we had a great time, had a nice dinner, had a great event at Ada's Wine Bar. Big shout out to Ariel Gale and the Maria Group for putting that together for us. Had a group of some very good quality people that really understood the need and necessity for our foundation, and they're eager for the next event. For our audience, Las Vegas is a new territory for us. It was a very successful event, had a lot of people talking about it. We basically had a little bit of a takeover at the craps table, had half the table be all RSF, and the beauty of it, everybody came home a winner. So we had a great time. You were definitely missed. I'm sure you saw our pictures on Instagram with all the food and the big old the wagon with the scale and all that stuff that Jason was having fun with. But we'll definitely get you out for the next one, and hopefully you had a nice weekend.
I did. Absolutely. I did see all the pictures of the food.
I'm sure you were very jealous because I know you stalk my Instagram for food.
Yeah.
But in any case, we've got a great guest here. A little bit of backstory. So I brought Veronica to Ryan to get scheduled. Veronica was somebody that was pointed to me by a friend, in that this friend saw her profile, listened to her podcast, thought she had a wealth of knowledge and information that we could steal some of her tips and pointers to help our audience as well. We tried to connect with her in person down here. Unfortunately, scheduling didn't work out, but we're happy to have her now. Her name is Veronica Valli. She is a recovery coach, a former clinical psychotherapist, a member of NADAC, and the host of the Soberful Podcast. So Veronica, welcome to our show. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you. It's great to be here.
I followed you a little bit on Instagram, but I'll be perfectly transparent with you. I don't know very much about you, and that's why this is very exciting, because I love learning about people, especially people in this space, because for me, the way that my brain works is I love getting everybody's perspectives and viewpoints. So I'm stoked to have you on here with Jaana and me, and we're going to pick your brain a little bit over the next 20 to 30 minutes here and see what kind of gold we can extract out of you. How's that sound?
I'll do my best.
Well, I mean, you did mention today is your 22nd birthday, so you're doing something right, and you've been doing it for over 2 decades. So I'm sure you've got some good tidbits around that. One question I have right off the bat, over the last 22 years, what's been one of those real big tips or tricks or things that you've kept in mind to help get you to this point today?
That's a big question. Yeah. So 22 years of sobriety. I remember thinking back in the day, because I got sober at 27, like, oh God, when I'm 20 years sober, I'll be like in my late 40s and I'll be so old and past it. And then you get here and it's completely different. I think one of the biggest things I've learned in the 22 years is creating the habit of sobriety, because I only drank. I mean, I was 27 when I got sober, and I started drinking around 14. So I only drank for about 13 years. So I've been sober way long than I drank for. And it's not about alcohol. I still need a program. I still need to work on my mental and emotional health. So I think the biggest lesson is the gratitude. Is I have a very clear, I can clearly see, I continue to work on myself. I continue to work on my emotional sobriety, and that keeps my mental and emotional health stable, which means that I don't get to the point where I think about drinking or using drugs. And I haven't thought about that for a long time. But I can see the payoff of that work. Like, there is a direct line between the emotional sobriety work I do and how my life is. It's no accident. It's not luck. It doesn't just happen. I kind of got that. I don't know when I got it, but it was fairly early on, where it's like, wow, I do this stuff and these great things happen in my life. And I do this stuff And when really hard things happen in my life, I'm able to navigate them in ways that I couldn't do before. So those things are very linked, and it all comes back to being sober and the work that came from that. And I'm so grateful that I got to have this experience.
So it sounds to me like the program that you're speaking of, or like that, having that regimen, right, and working towards that helps you essentially kind of clear some of the distortion or disruption that society or just living may bring, and kind of give you call it a baseline or the foundation to be able to tackle whatever may come, because you have this backbone or support to lean on and help you through those events. Does that sound about right?
Yeah. So like most people, what happens is when alcohol takes up too much space in your life, like it took up a lot of space, I call it bandwidth, took up a lot of bandwidth, a lot of energy, time thinking about drinking, thinking about not drinking. I defaulted to alcohol to manage my emotions. I just defaulted to alcohol. So when I stopped drinking, I was an emotional teenager. Like it's like walking around with your skin off. I didn't have basic human skills to navigate being in the world as an adult because they weren't role modeled to me. I wasn't taught them. And I just defaulted to alcohol very early on. So even when I had life experiences where I could have learned some good lessons, I didn't, because I just used alcohol to get through them. So that's the kind of the big part of sobriety, really. It's just, and what I do in my work, it's just personal development. There's really important things we have to know, like how to have boundaries. When I do my programs, I always say this to my clients: if you do nothing else but work really hard on having boundaries in your life will change. You'll be able to see it get better. It will be different. I didn't know how to have boundaries. I was a people pleaser. I didn't know how to recognize my needs and ask for my needs to be met. I didn't know, and this is the big one for me, deal with resentments. I just didn't know. I was, would rent so much space in my head to resentments. I didn't know how to deal with fear. All of those things. I mean, I'm a mother. That's what I'm trying to role model and teach my sons, is those essential life skills. And I think so many of us don't have them. And this world presents us with so many external fixes to not having those skills. And alcohol is number one, but smoking, vaping, screens, food, all of that we default to instead of doing this internal work, which pays off in such abundance. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. So a follow-up question to that, talking about the pursuing of these life skills and stuff. So how did you have that moment of clarity or that realization that, the alcohol's not working? I'm assuming this was when you were 27 when you decided. And before I get into that, were you in the UK or were you here stateside at 27?
No, I actually got sober in the USA. I got sober in Key West in Florida.
Gotcha. Okay. So at what point, or what was that moment of clarity that you realized, okay, I can't keep doing this. This is not sustainable. I am not developed in terms of life skills and, social skills, things like that. And I need to make a change. When did that come into the picture?
So I never thought I had a problem with alcohol. I knew I had a problem with cocaine, and I knew I shouldn't do that. And I knew I had some really bad mental health problems that were completely unique and nobody else on the planet had. Anxiety and panic attacks were a massive part of my story, caused by drug use that I then used alcohol to try and treat, which is very common now, I know. Because of my anxiety and panic attacks, I accidentally got into recovery. I actually thought, while I was still drinking and probably using drugs, that I went and did some training as an addictions counselor. The reason being, I couldn't be in groups of people because I had so much anxiety, but I could do like one-to-one. And I was like, what job is there that I can do one-to-one? Oh, therapy. So I went along and I started doing it, and I started ringing some bells, and then it was suggested to me that I go to some self-help groups to see what that was like. And I went to these self-help groups and I didn't really relate or identify until I heard someone talk about fear. And so I heard someone talk about fear in a way I'd never heard anyone talk about fear. And they described me, and they described how fear ruled their lives. That they were frightened of what people thought of them, of not being good enough, of not being lovable, of just frightened of people. And I was just like, oh, that's me. I thought I was the only person who felt that way. I really thought you were all fine. You look fine to me. I never thought anyone felt like that. And as soon as I heard that, that was my moment of clarity. I then understood I drink because of how I feel about myself inside. I don't know how to be in this world without being comfortably numb. But it's causing, the cost of my drinking and my drug use is so massive, I can't pay it anymore. And I, honestly, when I stopped drinking, I was completely signed up to the belief that alcohol is the best way to have fun, excitement, belonging, connection, to relax and to reward yourself. And that if I chose not to drink alcohol ever again, I would miss out on all those things forever. And I was not happy about that, but I was accepting of it because I saw that my mental health would improve. So I reluctantly signed up to a life of grayness and dullness and never having fun if it meant my panic attacks and my anxiety and my paranoia and all of that would go. I was accepting of that trade. Boy, was I wrong.
Yeah, and I think what you're speaking on is exactly one of the reasons why we do this show. I mean, we've had over 105 episodes, and when you listen to all of them or some of them, you start to see a pattern in that I could probably point out people that feel more like you than feel less like you.
Yeah.
And that relatability is how we're getting people to open up, talk about it. And yeah, groups and going in front of a room full of people and just opening your heart out and what you've been through, that can be a daunting task. And to that point, for the individuals that don't feel comfortable doing that, either one-on-one therapy or smaller process groups, or even this podcast, this is something you can listen to in private, throw your headphones on. No one will ever know what you're doing or what you're trying to do. And that could be a great start for some of these individuals to really understand that, okay, yes, I am struggling. No, I'm not alone. Let me see if I can find some tips and tricks from other people that have made it through this to see if they work for me. Thank you for mentioning that and being vulnerable about that, because it's something that I think a lot of people need to hear. And I think, especially in today's world with social media and stuff like that, when people see role models or people that they look up to, or even people that they don't know, but they think are doing that well, and when they become vulnerable like that, it opens up conversation. And conversation is the only way that we're going to be able to not only get people more help, get more people to reach out and speak up on the struggles that they're having, but it's ultimately the way that we get people more connected with one another after having things like, politics or wars or social media splitting people up and isolating, because isolation is the worst thing.
It is hugely important because I it sounds like a joke now, but I really truly believed I was the only person who felt the way that I did. I had no idea. I mean, that was transformational for me, is meeting other people in sobriety at different stages of their recovery. Because again, I didn't really think I had a problem with alcohol. I was a binge drinker. I didn't drink every day. I didn't drink first thing in the morning. I drank like my peer group, like people did in their 20s back in, the end of the 90s. And so it was just jaw-dropping for me to just realize that other people struggled in the same way. So telling our stories and over and over and over, it's one of the most important things we can do, I think.
Yeah, and one thing I also want to touch on, you were suggesting that alcohol in your mind was, how you had fun or how you got to relax at the end of the day, or that reward. So when you first entered into recovery and alcohol was no longer part of that picture, did you feel like all the fun was ripped out of your life, or how did you overcome that notion?
Oh, God, yeah. I mean, I was 27. My peer group, there was no accident that I ended up in Key West, Florida. Let me tell you, I ended up at Key West, Florida when I was 19, because that's where the party is. And like any good, burgeoning alcoholic, your main focus in life is where's the party. So I saw all my peers, going out, and we went out to like 5 a.m. It was just madness. And my perception was that was a great night out. But I think our culture really conditions us to ignore the cost. I want to tell you, my drinking was not fun. I mean, at the beginning, maybe in my early teens, like there was definitely some fun, but the cost was so high for me, it far outweighed it. And, money, definitely, time. I used to get the worst hangovers. I mean, I'd be, 2 or 3 days just feeling like crap. The things I said and did, the way I embarrassed myself, the way I compromised my integrity, my dignity. I mean, it was just, so I always tell people it's really important to know this. The first year of sobriety is not how it is long term. It just isn't. We kind of have to, the first year can feel like a trudge. I mean, I remember one Saturday night cleaning my apartment from top to bottom because I just didn't have anything else to do. And I was like, is this it? Is this what I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life? Like home on a Saturday night, bored, like scrubbing the toilet. That's as exciting as it gets. And I remember the first time I ventured out, I wanted to go dancing. I love to dance with a few sober friends. And we went to a bar and we danced and we left at midnight and it was kind of okay, but very weird. And then over a bit of time, it just became my new normal. I met sober friends and I went back to England when I was 28 and I've done all the things. Like I love to dance and I love to socialize and I'm an extrovert. So I was going to nightclubs with sober friends who drank at 28, 29. I was going to gigs. I was going to festivals. I was traveling. I was going, I did everything. I did it all. And it was all better sober. And after the first year, it quickly, and then you kind of see like drunk people and you're like, oh God, they're boring. Like that doesn't look, I remember going to a big concert, I lived near London. So there was so much great live music. And I'd go with sometimes groups of friends who drank and their perception, like mine is, or like mine was, alcohol will improve this experience. If I add alcohol to this event, it will make this event more. It will be more fun, more. And I'm looking at them, I'm like, they just missed 3 songs because they were lining up for the beer. Then they just missed like the best song because they then had to go to the toilet. And then they're just like kind of blubbering on about crap to like, whereas I'm there like living every second of every note of my favorite band. And I'm like, wow, sobriety, in my opinion, is about 2 things. It is a shift in perception. We perceive the world, ourselves, and the people in it differently to how we did. And we get that shift in perception through consistency, through the consistency of, just like we have to exercise consistently. Just because I could run 10K 15 years ago doesn't mean anything today. We consistently work on our mental and emotional health. And that leads to my shift in perception. So there's this kind of big awakening, I think, after the first year where you're just, you have this experience, your first, party or whatever, and it is weird and it is a bit uncomfortable. And then it just becomes your new normal. And then, I'm almost 50 now and I'd like to be in bed by 9:30. So I don't want to really do any of those things. But back in my late 20s and early 30s, I was living the life. And I was looking at the people drinking, doing the same thing as me and thinking that does not look attractive and that does not look like fun. It was a shift in perception.
Well, I appreciated the point that you made where, it takes hard work. It does take commitment, consistency. And so I'm just wondering, was you getting sober, making that decision, okay, I have to make a change. Was that the first time getting sober? Did you stay sober or was there any lapse or anything?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I want to say one thing that's really important. Getting sober is not hard work. Being sober is not hard work. Having a drink problem is hard work. Mm-hmm. Being in active addiction is really, really hard work. Sobriety requires effort. And those two things feel very different. But I hear people say that all the time. It's really hard. I'm like, no, it's not. Have you had an alcohol problem? Have you been to work with the worst hangover? Like, have you woken up and realized you've like said a bunch of stuff you regret or like hidden from people? Like, that's hard work. So it requires effort. So I started looking for help when I was 18. So when I was 18, so I started drinking around 14, binge drinking. It was big, you know, it was the very early 90s in the UK, late 80s. Loved it. Oh God, loved it. Got introduced to hallucinogenics at 16. Loved it. Thought I was living the life. And at 18, I went into drug-induced psychosis on the back of a bad trip that I was suicidal. It was really bad. And I couldn't tell anybody. I was so scared to tell anybody. So I was literally suicidal on the inside. I had auditory hallucinations. It was really bad. And after a few months, I managed to go to my doctor and kind of sort of tell him a little bit what's happening. He prescribed me Valium, which started my prescription drug abuse. And that's when my alcohol consumption changed, because I very quickly, 2 or 3 drinks, I could, socialize. So I was looking for help from 18 to 27, and I went to many, many places, and it was all about my mental health problems. I saw doctors, psychiatrists, psychologists, churches, coaches, mental health workers. So I regularly looked for help, but I was presenting with anxiety and paranoia. And I don't recall that anyone really asked me about my drinking. And if they did, I probably minimized or lied, which is very common. But I don't recall alcohol being part of that conversation. And alcohol was the problem. And I think that's for many reasons. I don't think it was very joined up then, mental health and addiction, because this is a long time ago, almost 30 years ago. But I also think it was because I still think in our culture, we kind of have this like cognitive break with alcohol. It's like I've met so many mental health workers now and doctors who think, drinking is necessary. Like everyone drinks. So by the time I got sober at 27, by the time I sort of started going to these self-help groups and finding out a bit more, I was done. Like I was done. And it was the first time. The big thing is I didn't understand what my problem was. And my problem was alcoholism and all of that entails, and everything came from that. So once I understood, oh my God, that's me, that's my problem. The solution is abstinence. And to then work some kind of program and get some help. I've never relapsed. And I feel like it's because I spent 9 years with it looking for help. I was desperately looking for the solution. It wasn't until I got to that point that abstinence was presented to me and everything was presented in a way that I understood.
When do you feel like you had, becoming sober, that awakening? Was it at that year point? Was it a little earlier? Because a lot of times, people put down the drink and the drug, and we learn that it's a symptom of what's really going on, right? You shared that an underlying issue was fear, for example. Was that shift before that year mark, or did it take a little longer?
Well, I don't think the awakening ever stops. I think that when you are active in your sober life, your life expands, and that expansion never ends. So right. It's your self-awareness continues to grow. I mean, I've had so many lessons in 22 years. I think, there's sort of certain breakthrough points. The first one was when I realized that so many people felt the same way as I did, and I drank because of fear. And I think I was 6 weeks sober or something like that at that point. I had a big rock bottom when I was 3 years sober. And I think this is very common. I've seen this with a lot of people. And it was all triggered by a romantic relationship. And I 3 years sober, I'd got a career, I had somewhere to live. Things were so much better. But I was incapable of having a romantic relationship. I had so much baggage from my past that I hadn't unraveled. And I would just have the same pattern over and over and over. And then in sobriety, I thought it should be better. I'm like, this should be better. And I met someone at 3 years sober, and that was such a gift for me, because when that relationship ended, I went into this black hole of despair, and I was so motivated by the pain to do whatever it took to never feel that way again. And that's when I started doing a whole lot of work on attachment and abandonment. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you that the one thing that's made the biggest change in my life and in my sobriety, and for me, this is what I see. This specific type of work is what really changes people. And for me, it was the resentment work. It was looking at resentments in a very cognitive and specific way, began to shift my perception. What happened is I began to see that nothing was ever personal, that nothing, even my parents, how they behaved, and I wasn't raised well, that it was nothing ever. It was unfortunate, shouldn't have been that way, but it had nothing to do with me. And I saw how I interpreted everything to be personal. Everything, they left me because I wasn't good enough. This happened because I wasn't good enough. I'm not lovable. And none of that was true. So I've forgotten your question now, but hopefully I've answered it in that.
You answered it. Yeah, absolutely. And I can relate. I love how you shared that because so I'm a little over 10 years sober, and I had a moment at 8 years of sobriety where I was like, oh my gosh, I still have so much unresolved trauma. And you just don't realize how much that impacts the way you look at your relationships with the people, places, and things. And it's not until you kind of have those painful moments in sobriety where it's like, okay, there has to be more. Kind of like you said, it's like an ongoing process. What are some things with 22 years? Congratulations on that, by the way, that's incredible. Today, what are some things that consistently you do to maintain just your spirituality and just a healthy perception and relationship to those people, places, and things?
So what served me the best over all that time is regular self-reflection. So I do regular inventory where I look at, I write this down because I can't do it in my head. So I write down my resentments, my fears, my limiting beliefs, and my gratitudes. And I do that regularly. Up until I had children when I was 10 years sober. I would say I would do that maybe out of 365 days a year, 300 days a year. I would spend 10 to 15 minutes most days self-reflecting and writing my resentments and fears, etc., out in a very specific way that enabled my perception of the matter to then shift. Once I had children, my first child, I stopped doing everything I've ever done. And at 9 months sober, wanted to kill everyone, particularly my husband. And I realized that I had become emotionally unwell. And within 3 weeks of just getting back on my program, I felt comfortable in my own skin. That's what happens when for me, the biggest part of the problem was I felt so uncomfortable in my own skin, and sobriety enabled me to feel comfortable in my own skin. And once you've experienced that, you never want to lose it. So I continue to do that now to this day. And I mean, resentments, I find at the beginning you have a lot, and then over time your perception has shifted that you just don't take things personally. But from time to time, I'll have a bugger of one show up, and I write it down as soon as I possibly can because I just don't exist in that way anymore. So when someone is really renting space in my head, by the way, when you have a resentment, when you start planning revenge, when you start being, I'm going to show them. I'm going to send them an email. I'm going to put them. Yeah, I'm going to put them. And that just burns energy and rents space in my head, and it's ridiculous. But I can't. There's something very seductive about them. So that for me, that regular work of self-reflection, it's I don't know if you're familiar with the concept Johari's window. It's about how we just need to increase our self-awareness, and that never ends. That never goes away. There's lessons. At 10 years sober, becoming a mother opened up a whole lot of childhood stuff that I had to resolve because I started parenting like my mother, which was the last thing I wanted to do. There's just all these, I like to call them gifts, these little gifts that come along that force us into self-reflection and growth so we can learn that lesson and move on to the next one.
Absolutely.
Yeah, something someone on our show has mentioned is that they basically see the drugs and alcohol like a brick wall that's in your way. And when you get rid of that brick wall, the amount of opportunities and things that become available to you are limitless. So that's where I agree with your sentiment of, it's always expanding because you never know what's possible when you get that hurdle out of your way.
It is. It's absolutely. I feel like you can look back. I can look back now and see like my life was so small. Like it just was small, and there's no, when you are spending. People with an alcohol problem do four things: they drink, they think about drinking, they think about not drinking, and they recover from drinking, and that requires a lot of bandwidth. And you can spend maybe bandwidth is energy and space to think thoughts. You can spend 20, 30, 40, 50% of your bandwidth on those things. And that's not what we came here to do. So when you stop drinking, you get all this extra bandwidth. And that is what enables us to grow emotionally. And by the way, my experience, that's where our extraordinariness is. You get to access your extraordinariness because you access bandwidth that you couldn't access before, and what a lot of people can't access. That's the gift of sobriety. It's an edge. You get the edge.
I don't think you could have said it any better. Purely, I mean, based on what we've experienced and what we've heard on these shows from a variety of individuals, you hit it right on the head. So I want to shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit more about your full life and the additional bandwidth. So professionally today, you're still in the recovery space. You have your Soberful Podcast and helping people. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're doing in the professional space and how that is incorporated as to, giving back and being of service?
Yeah, so I worked in the UK as a clinical psychotherapist. I had a private practice and I ran and worked in a couple of rehabs. And then when I moved to America with my American husband, I transitioned to working as a coach, which suits me much better. So I have a podcast, the Soberful Podcast, with my ex-mentor and my ex-boss, who's 36 years sober. And we've been doing that for about 4 years. And then I have 3 books out, one that just came out in January called Soberful, Uncover a Sustainable, Fulfilling Life Free of Alcohol, which is a therapeutic program. Quit Lit's a big genre, and there's a lot of memoirs, but I didn't feel there was a lot of answers. So I wrote it like, this is the work. This is the therapeutic emotional work you need to do. So that's all laid out in that book. And then I have a subscription group, and I do coaching groups and that kind of stuff, which I love.
That's awesome. And by all means, we're going to get your book on our website as a resource and hopefully get more knowledge out into people's hands that they can really use.
Thank you.
So when you're not doing a podcast and all of this recovery work and helping people with coaching, what do you like to do for fun?
Well, it's funny. I was just thinking about this yesterday. So I have 2 boys, aged 10 and 7. And yesterday afternoon, we live in beautiful Lake Tahoe. We took our bikes out for the first time, this year. And we were biking along by the lake, and I just thought it doesn't get better than this. Like I was like chatting with my oldest son, and we were biking, and then we stopped for ice cream. Like doesn't get better than that. The fact that I have a family, I have what I call a second chance life. This is not a life a person like me should have had. If I'd have carried on drinking and using drugs, I probably wouldn't have been alive by now. But this is. I have a very healthy, functioning marriage with a wonderful man. We love being together as a family. It doesn't get any better than that. So, that's kind of, I just came back from a big sober women's event in Miami. That's super fun. Connection and family, being outside, hiking, there's nothing that compares to it.
It's cool to see individuals, you say you never thought you would have this or what have you, but all the people that say that, I sit on the other side of the table and go, based on what I've heard, you deserve it. You put in the work, you get to reap the rewards and enjoy it. And now you get to enjoy it in the fullest extent of what you're experiencing, versus like when we were talking about festivals, people are too busy chasing alcohol or chasing the bathroom or chasing whatever that isn't the most important thing that's in front of them right now. And you're at a spot where the most important thing being your family and these experiences, you get to enjoy completely and not have to worry about anything on the back end other than being in the moment.
Yeah, it never gets old. And that's the gift, and it's the secret. I'm working on several projects at the moment. And one of them is we can't tell people that drinking is bad for them. We've got to show them that an alcohol-free life is just completely different to anything that we have been told or persuaded. No,
and I love that. And you're feeding on the positive outlook and mindset versus, a lot of people get beat negatively into their head, all these bad things. Let's highlight the good. Let's change the narrative. Let's give people a reason to look into this, whether they're curious or they're having, struggles, or, maybe they've been drinking, it's not working, and they have the awareness to, try something new. But I think that message and bringing the positive aspect to it is the way to go. It's how we're going to reduce the stigma. It's how we're going to get people to open up and ask for help and reach out and speak their truths and tell their stories. And I'm so happy that you mentioned that. I loved this show. This was great. Love to get you back.
Happy to come back. And I go to Southern California a lot because I have family down there. So maybe next time we can do it in the studio.
Yeah, or worst case, just connect for coffee or something. But we definitely want to keep you around and a part of this organization, since we definitely heard some of the wealth of information you have to share, and definitely want to get your word out. So with that being said, if people want to follow you or learn more about what you're doing or your coaching program, where can they find you?
Soberful.com is my website, and I'm on Instagram, Veronica Valli, and I have a free Facebook group as well, which is just called Soberful.
Awesome. Well, don't mention that it's a free Facebook group, because I'm going to just start plugging people into there. But thank you again so much for joining us, and definitely want to keep you connected and close to us, and get you out to some of our events, or maybe as a speaker or something if you're in town.
Love to. Let me know. Love to.
Beautiful.
Just thank you for sharing your story. I could relate on a lot of different levels. I'm a mother, as Alex shared. I have 4 girls. And so I know that the work that we continue to do is so important, just in recreating the story for them. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.